they pressed upon him. "Stand back," said Curdie, grasping his pickaxe tighter by his knee. They only grinned and pressed closer. Curdie bethought himself and began to rhyme. 10, 20, 30, you're all so very dirty. 20, 30, 40, you're all so thick and snorty. 30, 40, 50, you're all so puff and snifty. 40, 50, 60, beast and man so mixty. 50, 60, 70, mixty, maxty, leventy. 60, 70, 80, all your cheeks so slaty. 70, 80, 90, all your hands so flinty. 80, 90, 100, altogether dundred. The goblins fell back a little when he began, and made horrible grimaces all through the rhyme, as if eating something so disagreeable that it set their teeth on edge and gave them the creeps. But whether it was the rhyming words, or most of them no words at all, a new rhyme being considered the more efficacious. Curdie had made it on the spur of the moment, or whether it was the presence of the king and queen gave them courage, I cannot tell. But the moment the rhyme was over, they crowded on him again, and out shot 100 long arms, with a multitude of thick, nailless fingers at the end of them, to lay hold upon him. Then Curdie heaved up his axe, but being as gentle as courageous, and not wishing to kill any of them, he turned the end which was square and blunt like a hammer, and with that came down a great blow on the head of the goblin nearest him. Hard as the heads of all goblins are, he thought he must feel that. And so he did, no doubt. But he only gave a horrible cry and sprung at Curdie's throat. Curdie, however, drew back in time, and just at that critical moment remembered the vulnerable part of the goblin body. He made a sudden rush at the king and stamped with all his might on his majesty's feet. The king gave a most unkingly howl and almost fell into the fire. Curdie then rushed into the crowd, stamping right and left. The goblins drew back, howling on every side as he approached, but they were so crowded that few of those he attacked could escape his tread, and the shrieking and roaring that filled the cave would have appalled Curdie but for the good hope it gave him. They were tumbling over each other in heaps in their eagerness to rush from the cave, when a new assailant suddenly faced him, the queen, with flaming eyes and expanded nostrils, her hair standing half up from her head, rushed at him. She trusted in her shoes. They were of granite, hollowed like French sabots. Curdie would have endured much rather than hurt a woman, even if she was a goblin. But here was an affair of life and death. Forgetting her shoes, he made a great stamp on one of her feet, but she instantly returned it with very different effect, causing him frightful pain and almost disabling him. His only chance with her would have been to attack the granite shoes with his pickaxe, but before he could think of that, she had caught him up in her arms and was rushing with him across the cave. She dashed him into a hole in the wall with a force that almost stunned him. But although he could not move, he was not too far gone to hear her great cry and the rush of multitudes of soft feet, followed by the sounds of something heaved up against the rock, after which came a multitudinous patter of stones falling near him. The last had not ceased when he grew very faint, for his head had been badly cut, and at last insensible. When he came to himself, there was perfect silence about him, and utter darkness, but for the merest glimmer in one tiny spot. He crawled to it, and found that they had heaved a slab against the mouth of the hole, past the edge of which a poor little gleam found its way from the fire. He could not move it a hair-breadth, for they had piled a great heap of stones against it. He crawled back to where he had been lying, in the faint hope of finding his pickaxe, but after a vain search, he was at last compelled to acknowledge himself in an evil plight. He sat down and tried to think, but soon fell fast asleep. Chapter 19. Goblin Counsels. He must have slept a long time, for when he awoke, he felt wonderfully restored, indeed almost well, and very hungry. There were voices in the outer cave. Once more then it was night, for the goblins slept during the day, and went about their affairs during the night. In the universal and constant darkness of their dwelling, they had no reason to prefer the one arrangement to the other, but from aversion to the Sun People, they chose to be busy when there was least chance of their being met either by the miners below, when they were burrowing, or by the people of the mountain above, when they were feeding their sheep or catching their goats. And indeed, it was only when the sun was away that the outside of the mountain was sufficiently like their own dismal regions to be endurable to their mole eyes. So thoroughly had they become unaccustomed to any light beyond that of their own fires and torches. Curdie listened, and soon found that they were talking of himself. "How long will it take?" asked Harelip. "Not many days, I should think," answered the king. "They are poor, feeble creatures, those Sun People, and want to be always eating. We can go a week at a time without food, and be all the better for it. But I've been told they eat 2 or 3 times every day. Can you believe it? They must be quite hollow inside, not at all like us, 9/10 of whose bulk is solid flesh and bone. Yes, I judge a week of starvation will do for him." "If I may be allowed a word," interposed the Queen, "and I think I ought to have some voice in the matter." "The wretch is entirely at your disposal, my spouse," interrupted the king. "He is your property. You caught him yourself. We should never have done it." The Queen laughed. She seemed in far better humour than the night before. "I was about to say," she resumed, "that it does seem a pity to waste so much fresh meat." "What are you thinking of, my love?" said the king. "The very notion of starving him implies that we are not going to give him any meat, either salt or fresh." "I'm not such a stupid as that comes to," returned Her Majesty. "What I mean is that by the time he is starved, there will hardly be a picking upon his bones." The king gave a great laugh. "Well, my spouse, you may have him when you like," he said. "I don't fancy him for my part. I am pretty sure he is tough eating." "That would be to honor instead of punish his insolence," returned the queen. "But why should our poor creatures be deprived of so much nourishment? Our little dogs and cats and pigs and small bears would enjoy him very much." "You are the best of housekeepers, my lovely queen," said her husband. "By all means, let us have our people in and get him out and kill him at once. He deserves it. The mischief he might have brought upon us, now that he had penetrated so far as our most retired citadel, is incalculable. Or rather let us tie him hand and foot, and have the pleasure of seeing him torn to pieces by full torchlight in the great hall." "Better and better," cried the queen and the prince together, both of them clapping their hands, and the prince made an ugly noise with his hare lip, just as if he had intended to be one at the feast. "But," added the queen, bethinking herself, "he is so troublesome. For poor creatures as they are, there is something about those sun people that is very troublesome. I cannot imagine how it is that with such superior strength and skill and understanding as ours, we permit them to exist at all. Why do we not destroy them entirely, and use their cattle and grazing lands at our pleasure? Of course, we don't want to live in their horrid country. It is far too glaring for our quieter and more refined tastes. But we might use it as a sort of outhouse, you know. Even our creatures' eyes might get used to it, and if they did grow blind, that would be of no consequence, provided they grew fat as well. But we might even keep their great cows and other creatures, and then we should have a few more luxuries, such as cream and cheese, which at present we only taste occasionally, when our brave men have succeeded in carrying some off from their farms." "It is worth thinking of," said the king, "and I don't know why you should be the first to suggest it, except that you have a positive genius for conquest. But still, as you say, there is something very troublesome about them, and it would be better, as I understand you to suggest, that we should starve him for a day or two first, so that he may be a little less frisky when we take him out. Once there was a goblin living in a hole. Busy he was cobbling a shoe without a sole. By came a birdie. "Goblin, what do you do?" "Cobble at a sturdy upper leather shoe." "What's the good of that, sir?" said the little bird. "Why, it's very pat, sir, plain without a word. Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they have got no soles?" "What's that horrible noise?" cried the queen, shuddering from pot metal head to granite shoes. "I declare," said the king with solemn indignation, "it's the sun creature in the hole." "Stop that disgusting noise!" cried the crown prince valiantly, getting up and standing in front of a heap of stones, with his face towards Curdie's prison. "Do now, or I'll break your head." "Break away!" shouted Curdie, and began singing again. "Once there was a goblin living in a hole." "I really cannot bear it," said the queen. "If I could only get at his horrid toes with my slippers again." "I think we had better go to bed," said the king.